Today's episode is something I'm so insanely excited about. You're going to get to meet Owen Fitzpatrick. And Owen Fitzpatrick is going to teach us how to do something really quite incredible. You're going to learn how people change their minds, how you can change your mind, and how you can go on to be able to help other people change their mind. So let's get straight to it and meet Owen Fitzpatrick. So Owen, you're in the business of changing people's minds.
Yes.
Why do people need their minds changing?
I think people need to learn how to change their own minds because their minds are already changing. And the question is what direction we're changing in. So for me, one of the things that I'm fascinated and always have been fascinated with is our ability to be able to believe in what we believe. And some of those beliefs are helpful and some of those beliefs are not so helpful and can negatively impact our life. So I try to help people to have more of a say over what they believe, so they can start to believe in the things worth believing in to make their lives better, to make them more successful, more effective, to make their relationships better. And from a business standpoint, to help them to be able to cultivate those beliefs in themselves, in their own business, in their own products or services. And so for me, everything comes back to belief because there's a difference between compliance and buy-in. And I'm trying to help people to create buy-in so that they can buy into themselves and believe more in who they are, but also so they can create buy-in to their ideas in a more impactful way.
Okay. We're going to circle back on that for sure. But what I'm really intrigued to understand is like, where are the moments that people need to have these conversations with self? Where are the most common reoccurring moments that exist inside individuals where they should be challenging their own beliefs, where their beliefs maybe require some form of debate? I
mean, we can reverse engineer it to whenever something goes wrong. Whenever you're struggling with life, it's either because something's happened to you or something's happened in you. So when something's happened to you, it can be very easy for us to fall into a trap where we feel that we're the victim of our circumstance. Okay. For years, I was a therapist. And when I worked as a therapist, there was pretty much two patterns I noticed in people that came to me. One was people would come in with a victim mindset. The reason for my problems is because of my husband or wife, because of my parents, because of my friends, because of my siblings, because of the economy, because of the government, etc. Other people would come in as the villain with the villain mindset, where they would say, the reason for my problems is me. I'm not good enough. I never was. I'm going to be found out any day now. I ruin everything I touch. I completely sabotage myself. And so for me, my job as a therapist back then was to help them to be able to go from the victim into the hero or the villain into the hero, both of which require you to focus on what you can do and what you control. And so getting back to your question, the times that we need to be able to shift our beliefs are the times where we're not getting the result that we want. And whether we blame ourselves for it or whether we blame the world for it, ultimately, we're the only ones that can actually do something about it. And for us to be able to change our behavior, we need to start with changing our beliefs, because beliefs are able to drive the behaviors. Because you can do something once off. If I try to make a change in my life, I can do it and reinforce it, but it doesn't guarantee that I'm going to become a different person. For me to become the different person that does this as a normal habit, I need to shift the beliefs about who I believe myself to be, why this matters, and how I'm going to be able to do it moving forward.
Do habits change beliefs or do beliefs change habits?
Both. I think when you when you shift your beliefs, there's a notion in psychology called cognitive dissonance, whereby our behaviors and our identity oftentimes will conflict with each other. And so if your beliefs are out of whack with your behaviors, one or both are going to change. So for instance, if you believe I'm this type of person, but you try to do something else, a lot of times they've had situations where people won the lottery and they found themselves a few years later as being just as badly off as they were beforehand. And the explanation often is that they have this sort of, inverted commas, poverty consciousness. In other words, their beliefs are that I'm this type of person. And when they get the money, they don't know what to do with it because their beliefs are out of whack with what's actually happening. So on the one hand, if you believe something, you're going to prove yourself right in that way. The self-fulfilling prophecy, we sometimes call it. But on the flip side, if you change your behavior, oftentimes you can start to see yourself as that type of person. Like if you push yourself to run every single day, sooner or later you become a runner. And once you become a runner, that's when things really shift. So if you ask me which is more important, your behavior or belief, I would argue your belief, because that's what drives the behavior. But at the same time, one of the ways to change your belief is also to change the behavior.
So this is just like which came first, the chicken or the egg all over again.
Exactly.
Okay, I get it. I think I get it. We got to work out like how people can learn from this and how people can use it. But what I'm equally fascinated about is why are we so reactive when it comes to needing to change our beliefs? Why do we have to wait for something to happen before we decide that now's the time to make a change?
Because beliefs, by the very nature of what they are very much connected to knowledge. So when we talk And again, there's a whole field that talks about epistemology and how we know what we know. But if we talk about our very first belief is more than likely something along the lines of, when this happens, this is what it means. So as babies, we learn, okay, if I cry, I get attention. That means crying creates attention. So we cultivate these kind of learnings or lessons very early on in our life. And as we do so, what that invariably means is that now we make predictions. So our brains are prediction machines.
Okay.
So our brain takes information in from the world, information in from what's going on in our body, and information in from the lessons or learnings we get. And we try to make the best decision possible to keep us alive. That's our brain's job.
Okay.
So in order to do that, the predictions it makes, it has to try to understand the world and create shortcuts in order to figure out what's going on. Those shortcuts are the beliefs that we hold. Now, some of those beliefs are more based on fact than others. But it's sometimes hard for us to be able to tell the difference between a belief based on evidence, real evidence, and beliefs that we feel are correct. And something that you've mentioned is that a belief is a thought that we agree with. I say belief is an idea we feel certain about, which is very similar.
Yeah.
And this belief that we feel certain about, in many ways, we don't always notice the difference between something that we should feel certain about and we shouldn't. And this also ties into our belief as well. We form all of these beliefs about who we are. And therefore, it's very difficult for us to change a belief unless it comes from the outside, because we're trying to be consistent. We're trying to have a consistent worldview, a consistent view about who we are. Because if we come up against a situation where that's threatened, that can be very scary for us, because it can feel like, if that's not true of me, what else is not true of me?
So our beliefs provide safety?
They provide security. And they provide an ability to be able to make better predictions. Because in order for me to stay alive, my predictions need to be good. So my beliefs need to be good.
Wow.
And if my beliefs are not good, then I'm in danger.
So our beliefs are actually largely used as a defense mechanism, more so than an offensive growth mechanism.
I believe so. Now, I believe they have an offensive growth mechanism in the sense that beliefs have the capacity and ability to help us to achieve what we want. And so that's why a lot of times when you read books, pretty much most books in the nonfiction era that are all putting ideas out there, those ideas are beliefs that they want us to believe in. So if you read Malcolm Gladwell, The Tipping Point, the belief that there's one core idea in that. And these big idea books have this one belief that they're trying to get you to believe in. And they have a lot of evidence to suggest that.
Right.
So those are, if you believe X, this is going to help you to Y. Then there's other books that are much more tactical to do with, these are things you can do, like the habit stuff. These are actions you can take, and that will help you to get there. And then there's, of course, the combination.
And they can be evidenced by other people that have then acted on those behalves. But what's really practically blowing my mind here is this reactive, proactive piece. Is you are going to change your beliefs when things happen to you. Yet you can also proactively take actions that allow you to change your beliefs that then change your habits. And I'm intrigued to say, let's go further down this. How do you take control of your own future life by almost pattern interrupted the fact that life's going to happen to you and for you to happen to life? And there's the famous story about Roger Bannister and the 4-minute mile. And I think most people listening in will have had some form of indication of that story being shared. And it was impossible to run a 4-minute mile, impossible to run a 4-minute mile. Nobody believed that a 4-minute mile was possible for any living human being on the planet. Roger Bannister breaks the 4-minute mile, changes all records, changes all beliefs. And since then, a gazillion people have learned how to be able to run a mile in under 4 minutes. And I think this is what happens when you read books. Is you get presented with new information. And if that information is well referenced, you shift your belief. I also think it's what happens when you go to conventions and conferences. And I speak at a lot of conferences and conventions, but one of the things that I see often have the biggest impact on people isn't the tactical keynote presentation from somebody like myself. It maybe is just somebody stepping up on stage on the platform and sharing with somebody their story of what they've achieved, and that in turn creates new beliefs in others. What other ways outside of books and conferences can people change their environment that gives them the chance to be able to bump into new data that could change their beliefs?
Well, I don't think it's just about changing their environment. I think it's also about forming. So we all talk about the growth mindset, Carol Dweck's, if you believe you can improve your abilities. I talk about what I call the belief growth mindset, which is having the mindset that says that I can update my priors if I experience new things,
Right.
new situations. So I think one of the things, and you could argue that it's another way of saying to be open-minded,
Right.
but we really have to be effective at that. We have to stop and learn to be actually rewarded mentally whenever we get things wrong, whenever we update our beliefs. So two people could go to a conference. One of them changes their beliefs, the other doesn't. One of them learns to transform their life, the other one doesn't. What's the difference between the two? One of them went there already with the confirmation bias to look for evidence to prove they're right and to dismiss evidence of contradiction. The other one goes in going, I really want to be wrong about this. I want to learn new things. It's almost like the humility of being able to go, what is it that I can get from this? And therefore, when they go to the exact same event, the exact same speaker, the exact same story, the story hits one person and doesn't hit the other because the other person's already telling themselves a story that is preventing them from taking on the wisdom. Like that would never work for me. Well, it's easy for her to say. Whereas the other person is going, oh shit, maybe this will work for me. Oh, well, that's interesting. And it's really the mindset we take into it. And this belief growth mindset means that it's much easier for us to be able to change our beliefs because we start with that. The problem is, and we've talked about this before, but the problem is so often we're desperately trying to be right as opposed to become right. And what I mean is we're trying to be right in the moment as opposed to playing the real game. And the real game is to be able to continuously expand our knowledge. And Socrates was doing this years ago. I mean, he was, he ended up not having a good result after it. It wasn't a good long game he played because he ended up having to drink hemlock. But he would ask questions, getting people to realize you're not as right as you think you are. And the reason it pissed people off was because no one likes uncertainty and no one likes to be challenged. Right. But that doesn't mean that they were right. It just means that they didn't like it. But he was trying to get to wisdom. And true wisdom is knowing what you don't know and understanding that even what you do know is probability. And I think so often we live in a world, and this is something that really helps people to change beliefs. We live in a world where we think in terms of didactically, I'm right or wrong. We don't think in terms of probability. We don't think in terms of there's multi-factors that might be causing this. And we instead try to simplify it for our brain's sake to go, oh, this is the way it is. Mm-hmm. You're right, I'm wrong. I'm right, you're wrong. And that's really not reality because in reality, there's always confusion. It's competing stories. I'm telling you a story. You're telling me a story. Well, they're stories. They're not facts. The stories are the interpretation of facts. And once we start to dive in and explore that, we get to realize there's a lot of stuff that I need to open my mind to. And that's what allows me. And it could be anything. You could be talking to your kid and your kid changes your belief in a moment. I was driving with my dad, and my dad is not any into personal development, but he's like the closest, him and my mom, I'm very, very close to. And we're driving in the car and I'm talking about, this, and he's pretty happy, generally speaking. And I would instead be very much naturally, I struggled with depression when I was a kid. I'm like naturally quite dark and, I win the battle, but I'm still, it doesn't come natural to me. And I said to him, for you, what is the key towards how come you're so pretty much happy with things? Have you got such a great attitude? And he's, quite religious. And he just turns to me and says, well, I think about, how bad other people have it and how lucky I am to not be in this situation. And it's completely it's not something I haven't heard a million times before, but the way in which he said it in that moment profoundly affected me. I kept thinking about it over and over again because it comes from someone who's not studying psychology, not studying self-improvement, not studying anything. His religious background, sure, but he's thinking to himself, how lucky am I? He's thinking about the worst case scenario. And very few people in my field or our field would be saying that as advice, going, think about how bad it could be.
Well, he's giving himself a comparison, right?
Yes.
That's what he's actually doing. He's contrasting out the spectrum of where he is on his field of play. And I think what it allows many of us to be able to think about is how do you zoom out so your belief has more perspective?
Yeah.
How do you zoom out to be able to say compared to what? And then I think most people see things as either better than they are or worse than what they are. It's hard to be able to see things exactly as it is. Mm-hmm. And it can only be seen exactly as it is when there's enough context.
Yeah.
Easiest way to find more context is to zoom further out. And therefore, your dad can look at things and say, well, given this new environment that I've just been able to position and judge myself within, I'm doing pretty damn good. I got nothing to complain about. I've got plenty to be happy about.
But the problem as well, Phil, is that it's not like all information is equal. So we're accessing information that is very much nowadays in society, very much driven by algorithms that are not making it easy to do that. So
Sure.
you go on social media, it's very easy for you to feel lesser than, because you're comparing yourself to the best case version of everyone else. Like the amount of mental health challenges that are happening. And it's not just because of social media, but social media is one of the vehicles that's making it easier for me to look around and go, everybody is killing it except for me. Everyone is on vacation or holiday except for me. Everyone is making more money except for me. Everyone's got this perfect relationship. And so we compare ourselves to all of these things outside. So it's not just we zoom out. It's when we zoom out, what are we able to see then? And if all you're being given from an informational standpoint is reaffirming this belief, doesn't matter how much we zoom out, we have to be able to.
Well, let's go there then. Let's look at the pros and cons and the realities that come from living in a society that loves headlines and labels. And this could be as simple as you're smart, you're smart, you're so smart, you're so beautiful, you're so kind, you're so funny, and any of the labels that maybe get given to you through adolescence and into life that you're then expected to carry and live up to. But it also could be this is a 7-figure entrepreneur, or you're a great problem solver, or it's a headline of like, if you're not this, then you're that we live in on social. Like, what is both the pros and the cons of labeling and the impact that labeling has on beliefs and therefore the kind of lives that people can live?
I think labeling is huge, because if you look at Carol Dweck's research, for example, her whole thing, or a big part of her whole philosophy around the fixed versus growth mindset, is that people that tend to have a fixed mindset tend to label themselves in a certain way.
Right.
And not always just, we have a sort of a myth about the growth mindset that it's like, oh, I'm not good at this, or I'm this type of person, and then that's it.
Yep.
Well, actually, a big problem as well is labeling that you are this type of person.
Right.
So her advice to parents is never tell your child, oh, you're so great, you're such a great artist. Instead, I love how much effort you're putting into that. I love how much you've improved. And that's what we reinforce. The idea of that is that what we're trying to do is get the child to be able to believe in the importance of effort, the ability, the belief in the importance of feedback, so that they believe in those things, and that will help them to take risks and explore and keep getting better. So labels have that negative impact in the form of both limiting us because, oh, I'm just not an artist, or equally too, making us sort of not want to risk losing that label. If you call me a great artist, it's almost like I want to play it safe, because I don't want you to see me painting something new in case you don't like it, in case you revise it.
Is this why people give up on things?
I think,
like musical instruments and arts and hobbies and things that they had in our adolescence that they then really struggle with, and then maybe they come back to it later in life. Is this the same reason?
I think it's one of the main reasons. I think there's probably one other reason is people just don't like it. They have negative associations. It's like, oh God, I have to do this. But I do think that a big part of it as well is believing that this is just not something I'm good at. But once again, if you are good at it, the reason why certain people might be good up to a certain point and never get past that point is because they then have the label and they don't want to let go of the label.
Okay.
They don't want to risk. It's a little bit like you said to me before, you could be great in one area, but then as soon as you move to a totally different place, now all of a sudden you got to start from scratch.
Yep.
And you got to be prepared to be humble and prepared to start. And it's not that you weren't great, but it's now you're in a different ballpark. And when you take risks, let's say you're a pianist, if you take risks in that, all of a sudden you're going to be making mistakes.
Yep.
And if I have a label that says I'm a great pianist and now I'm making mistakes, that's the cognitive dissonance here. And my belief now is being shaken.
Right.
So they're the negative sides. On the positive side, if I believe that I am a great pianist, then that also helps in terms of the self-fulfilling prophecy, because then I'm like more confident.
Got it.
So the labels help you build confidence in who you are, but can sometimes limit you in terms of pushing outside or getting better or improving, and can also limit you if they're on the negative side. They limit your ability or your confidence in that way.
So even when we can look at that fact of labeling, you've got to be very careful how you label yourself or the groups that you allow yourself to be labeled into. You and I have had some conversations even about like the whole political situation. And you see people that they will label folks on one side or the other, like, oh, he or she is a somebody supporter.
Yeah.
And that's the label that they put on somebody. Or they'll create they're a insert adjective party. And that's the only thing they have to say about them.
Because it's usually the only thing they can say about them.
Okay.
I mean, what I've seen is in Ireland, we grew up, and in Northern Ireland, we have like, obviously it was to do with, you know, the occupied territory and whatnot, and the majority of the news was the Catholics versus the Protestants.
Right.
Now, I guarantee if you ask most of the Catholics, what's the core differences from a religious perspective between you and Protestants, or you ask the Protestants, what's the core differences between, none of them would turn around and say transubstantiation. None of them would turn around and go Martin Luther. Like, people wouldn't actually go in and describe the differences because most of them don't know, because it's the label that they give to that other side. Right. And the same is true in terms of politics. And so it's very easy for me to turn around to somebody and go, oh, they're a Trump supporter, or they're a Harris supporter. Oh, they're a liberal communist. Oh, they're a fascist. I mean, these are beautiful labels because we can just throw them out there. And I've heard even, you know, thought leaders use this, you know, this collective term, postmodern, like they describe a person in one nice little, you know, square. And once they've done that, I don't have to say any more. Most of the time they do it because they can't say any more. Because in order to truly understand people, we need to realize you have to be more nuanced. You have to be able to understand that people can have the very same values as you, but have a different position than you. People can believe one thing, but see something else totally different. And we don't like that because our brains also like to make things simple. And so the same reason for stereotypes, the same reason for generalizations, the same reason why we're able to recognize a chair and know what it is because our brain wants to use and conserve as much energy as possible. Our brains use about 20 to 25% of the calories we take in. So our brains are using what we call heuristics or shortcuts all the time. And those shortcuts are sometimes stereotypes. Those shortcuts are generalizations. So when I call a person, I wouldn't do this, but if I call a person, oh, they're just a such and such supporter, that means all I'm doing is creating this box. I don't have to think about them. And I immediately, if I say Trump supporter to you, or I say Harris supporter to you, a certain image will come to mind, this stereotypical image. And yet, if you try to look for them, you might find the odd one online or on the news being interviewed. But the majority of people that'll be voting for either of them or have voted for either of them, that's not, you know, what they are. They're so much more than that.
Well, they also have to be more than that, because I find what's interesting, particularly in this political campaign that we're going through right now, is you could have been labeling somebody as a somebody supporter, and now you have to label them as a somebody else supporter because of an external change.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it means that by its very nature, nobody is one thing.
And people, and nobody's ever one thing. But as people, we like to be able to make things as simple as possible. And so we reduce it down to that. And that's one of the, I suppose, worst things that we can do, because it's also what immediately sets us apart. There's this great book called Against Empathy by Paul Bloom, a psychologist. And in it, one of the things he talks about is, while empathy is a great thing in many ways, the problem is that the more you empathize with some people, like the more you form a bond with others. And Cialdini calls this the seventh principle of unity in his book Influence. But it's like, you're closer to others. Well, that actually also separates you from the other side.
Right.
And the problem is in society, and we use the word tribalization and whatnot, but now all of a sudden it's like, as soon as I know what side you're on, immediately I fall into the trap of going, oh, they're the enemy and I'm on the good side. And we've been training this since we watched Star Wars. You know what I mean? It's like, nobody looked at Darth Vader and said, oh, Darth Vader, I don't know, now I can understand where he's coming from. Like, no one did that. It's like, they're the baddies. The only time I've seen a great example where this is starting to happen is Cobra Kai. So Cobra Kai is a wonderful TV series.
Oh, you're so good. Yeah.
And it's a wonderful transformation. Like, to me, that's what we need more of, is that in the original Karate Kid, you have Daniel LaRusso, and he's like this, you know, person that is the teenager and Mr. Miyagi, and you're like paint the fence, and it's so cool. And the enemy in the first one is this, you know, this guy Johnny, right? And Johnny's like the baddie, and he's like a bully. And Cobra Kai flips it, and it's all about Johnny, and it's his perspective and how his life is struggling, and he's the goodie, he's the hero. That's what I think we need more of, is that we need to realize no one who's a baddie thinks of themselves as baddie. Darth Vader even wasn't going, I'm a baddie. He was thinking to himself, this is what the world, the universe needs order. And the order is the emperor, and the order is, I can make this world a peaceful place, right? Even Thanos in the Marvel, he clicks his fingers. He wanted to kill half of all living beings, right? Why? Because he thought that was what the universe needed, right? These are people that believe their good intentions, and yet we label other people as enemies, not realizing, well, they're doing the same thing as us. No one's turning around going, I'm the villain in this.
Here's what I've learned to be true in this changing of minds piece is it's very, very difficult, bordering on impossible to move a no to a yes or a yes to a no. It's highly possible and proven on repeat to you move a yes to a maybe and a maybe to a no, or a no to a maybe and a maybe to a yes. It's like this passing through of a gray space. Something I regularly teach, and I don't even know the science behind it, and I'd love to understand it more, is I give a direct piece of advice, which is to never, ever, ever speak in absolutes. And I know that that in itself is a little counterintuitive, is to use an absolute to say to never speak in absolutes. But I think it makes the point. And I've learned that you can create a lot more change in others if you could say, well, you know, many people in your situation. If you never say everybody, you never say nobody, you never say like always or every single, but you create movement that people can step towards and opt out in. I know that works. Why does that work?
There's a great book. Well, I say it's a great book. It's a very heavy book and a very dry book, but it's a very powerful book that was written in the 1930s called Science and Sanity. Okay. And it was written by a guy called Alfred Korzybski. He's the guy who the phrase, the map is not the territory, comes from that. And in a nutshell, one of the things he talks about is this field he calls general semantics. And it's the notion that the way in which we describe the world and the way in which we talk about the world has an impact and an influence in the way in which people perceive it. So there's a few years after that, based upon the work of Korzybski, a guy called David Bourlan came up with this language called E prime. And E prime is language without the verb to be. So instead of me saying, that is terrible, you have to say, that seems terrible to me. And so with the general semantic stuff and with the Bourlan stuff, it's really about indexing all your thoughts. So I can't use always and never and every. And sometimes we don't even use always, but it's almost presupposed silently.
Yes.
We don't say the word, but yet we're presupposing this is what it is. And the more accurately we can actually describe our experience, the more we're saying, this is how I perceive the world. The more likely we are to be able to have better conversations, but also to think healthier. Okay. Most of the same cognitive distortions that from a CBT perspective, cognitive behavioral therapy, most of the distortions that they challenge are things like generalizations, the all or nothing thinking, all those kind of things are the same things that we challenge whenever we look at decision making in business and cognitive biases. It's always about figuring out, and I say always, recognizing when we label that and understanding that most of the language we have, as NLP, neuro-linguistic programming would say, is we delete information, we distort information, and we generalize information. And in doing so, we formulate these all or nothing generalizations, which is, again, easy for us to do. Our brains like it. It's simple. Other people can get it. The problem is it's not accurate.
And it creates conflict.
And it creates conflict because it's not accurate. Because every single time you say every, immediately there's always going to be counterexamples. And part of your job is when you're changing beliefs is to find the counterexamples to get them to realize. And even better, something that you do is you get them to find the counterexamples. Okay. So you say, has there ever been a time where this wasn't true? And all of a sudden they go, well, and that's when you start to move them towards doubt. Or in your case, that's when you start to move them towards the middle, right? So it's no longer a yes, it's now the middle. It's now a maybe. And then you move them towards the no. But the only way we can do that, again, the only way, is to recognize these patterns happening and not to stop saying, it's like, we'll still use the word but, we'll still use the word only, we'll still use the word always. But when we realize the way we do it, and when we notice it happening and you notice other people, then we can start to get to the bottom of, well, it's not always, it's not every. And we can start to target in on what really matters and what's really going on and what's really accurate for their actual experience.
Sorry to interrupt the conversation for a second. My guess is that you're getting something from this. And I know it's a lot sometimes here on the Exactly Show. We go fast, we cover a lot of ground, and I'm keen to understand, are you enjoying this? Is this valuable to you? And if so, then please subscribe. Please be ready to receive the next episode. But also leave some comments about what it is that you like, the kind of guests that you'd like to be learning from, or perhaps even just exactly what would you like to know more about so I can source you more of the right kind of guests and give you more of this type of content. There's a significant amount of very deep thinking, and we are tackling some fairly significant topics here in what we're talking about with changing people's minds. I'm going to try to make it simple for a second. There are situations that happen in many households around the world where there are people saying things like, you never empty the dishwasher. You always leave your clothes on the bedside. How should we approach those conversations instead if you want to see a change in behavior?
Well, first of all, they're actually going in a better direction than they could be. So first of all, what they could do is you're so lazy. So the labeling comes back in.
Right.
What the researchers, John and Julie Gottman, have found is that one of the things, there's a number of things they talk about, that they can make really accurate predictions about how healthy a relationship will be, is whether or not you form into complaint, which is what you just gave the examples of, or criticism, which is about the person. So first of all, they're doing a better job by saying you always do this than they would be to go, you're such a slob, or you're so lazy, or you're such a mess. So that's the first thing, is good on you. But at the same time, if you say you always, all you're doing, I mean, if you think about it, number one, that's not true.
Correct.
And number two, it's not helpful.
Correct.
And so if I'm trying to get you to engage in a behavior, I have to instead go, what is it that I need to say to you that maximize the likelihood that you'll actually want to do this? Now, there's been some studies, getting back to the labeling, is that Jonah Berger, in a book that he wrote called, I think, Magic Words, which is, not a million miles away from your first book. Yeah, it's everyone's using it now. But it's a more recent book. And one of the things he talks about is research that showed that if you want your child, let's say, to help you with the washing up, instead of saying, can you help me with this? Can you be a helper? Yeah. Actually had a more significant impact. People are more likely, because I can be a helper was more motivating than just helping. Right. The behavior wasn't as appealing as the actual identity.
My kids at preschool loved being helper of the day.
Yeah. And yet, if you ask
them, we're proud of that.
That's it. Because we love that kind of thing. So that's, for example, a situation where labeling can be useful, labeling can be helpful, when you're enticing people with it. Because to a degree, Phil, that's why we buy a lot of the stuff we buy. It's what I always call identity purchasing, is we buy things because it's perceived identity, as in, the reason I'm buying this is I'm the kind of person that would buy this. This is the kind of thing.
It's the story you tell yourself about yourself.
Exactly. Yep. Or this is desired identity. This is who I want to be. So it's the story you tell yourself about who you want to be. And so the stories we tell ourselves about who we are, who we want to be, informs a lot of the decisions we make about what we buy. Okay. But the same is true in terms of, let's say, around the house. So nobody walks around going, you know what? I really want to be lazy. No one wants to go around going, I hope I get nagged about this, right? No one thinks to themselves, this is what I want to do. And so what do they want? What they want is they want to be able to feel good. What makes them feel good? Having a label or identity placed on them that makes them feel good, or being provided with an opportunity to be able to do something good that doesn't cost them much in terms of energy. And being able to approach them like that is not always easy, because sometimes people say to me, oh, and I've tried everything. I've tried absolutely everything. And usually that means they've tried one, maybe two things a million times in the same way. But if we are losing it with people and we're saying, you're always doing this, think about it like this. It's more like you're reinforcing that behavior. Right. Because again, like Cialdini would say, if you want to get more people to do something, tell them most people are doing this. If you want to get someone to do something, show them their behavior and go, you're always doing it. Yep. It's very easy for them to go, oh, I must be always doing that. Therefore, it must be the kind of thing that I always do. Okay. And you make it worse. So what you're doing is, whenever they do something that helps you, that's what you reinforce. I mean, this is psychology 101, but Phil, thank you so much for helping me today. That was wonderful. I love when you do that. It's amazing. Now, all of a sudden, you've got a reward. And next time you're in that situation, well, maybe, just maybe, you'll want the reward. And so one of the best ways to be able to deal with it is to be able to make it so that you look out for the times that they're doing it and you make a bit of a deal. Not always, but at the start, you condition them so that when they do it.
So catch people doing it right, not tell them off for doing it wrong.
Yes, because when you catch them for doing it right, you're reinforcing it, you're making them feel good, and they associate that good feeling. So now they're going to do it because there's something in it for them.
So nothing more complex than look for moments of gratitude, deliver them with sincerity, and try to catch those more often than you catch the bad things.
Yes. And be wary of your own mindset, because as people hear that simple advice, they go, yeah, I get it, guys. But at the same time, you don't understand. It doesn't work in my case. But the question I would have back is, so how's what you're doing at the moment working for you? Right?
Right. Because that ain't working either.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
at least in this context, it's actually, you'll have more enjoyable conversations.
But it's
as well.
sincerity, it's meeting the moment.
Yeah.
And you could lazily say to somebody, hey, thanks so much for emptying the dishwasher,
Yeah.
where the undertone is for once.
Yes.
Or
Yes.
you could say, hey, I super appreciate you catching on to something that's important to me. And by the way, I noticed you did the dishwasher. Thank you.
And that's such an important point as well, because, and you'll know this better than anyone, but so often what people will do is when they change things, well, let's, for example, say they come along to a course, they learn from you or they learn from me, and they're studying about the words they use. They'll turn around and go, I tried what you said, it didn't work. And they'll tell me what they've said, but they don't realize that even though they didn't use the same words they've used, you could still hear the same words. You know what I mean? It was
Right.
like, you idiot was like not said, but it may as well have been said in the tone
Right.
of voice.
Yeah.
But it's almost like sometimes people think, oh, I just have to use these words and that'll be fine. Well, no, actually, there's an undercurrent in, like you said, in the sincerity and the way in which you approach it. It's your mindset and what you're looking to do and how you're looking to make them feel. And if you focus more on how you want the other person to feel, as opposed to what you want to say,
Yep.
that's what makes the difference. And most of the stuff I would argue in exactly what to say, it doesn't just work because of the words. It works because it's targeted in on how it's going to make the other person feel.
Right.
And that's, to me, what real magical communication is all about.
Well, exactly what to say and magic words in it are a myth. What they really are is principles of influence and persuasion disguised as examples.
Yeah.
The examples could have been hundreds of other examples that could have demonstrated a version of a similar principle. And I know how learned and how well studied that you are. And you've demonstrated it in this interview discussion today as you keep referencing bodies of works of others and even sharing the importance of your wisdom is not your wisdom. Your wisdom is the collection of wisdom you've collected from others plus your learned experiences, right? Like that's why you believe what you believe. You've got like a resume that is off the charts in terms of the things that you've been involved in. And one of the things that I love about you and your work is how humble you are and how much of the world of communication, influence, and persuasion has been influenced by things that you've been involved in. One of those big things that you're involved in is neuro-linguistic programming. It's from a long time ago. Is the foundation, the birth of NLP. And I find it fascinating in my world right now that when I teach influence and persuasion, people say, so is this NLP? Or they'll say, so how does this differ from NLP? Or they'll say, what's better? Like EWTS or NLP?
Yeah.
And I figured it would be like irresponsible for us to have a conversation about labels and then not look at these two labels and then let's put them to battle with each other for a second and say like, how do you respond to those things? And also, how do you relate to how NLP is useful in the world 2024 and beyond?
I think that the big mistake a lot of people make with NLP, and I've been in the field since I was 13 years old, right? So I got to started reading books with it. I've written a bunch of books with the co-creator of NLP, Dr. Richard Bandler. Really delighted to have him as a friend and mentor, creative genius that he is. And the big mistake I see most people make is it's almost like this is a team I'm on. So I see so many people. I'll give you a simple example. Many years ago, about 20 years ago, I was delivering a talk in Scotland in this conference. It was, I think, a medical conference. And I arrived the day before, and I was one of the speakers. And there was this guy who was sitting opposite me, and it was all speakers and the MC and stuff was at one table at dinner. And this guy sitting opposite me, he turns to me and he goes, so what are you talking about? And I said, I'm talking about a thing called, at the time I was speaking on NLP. So I was like, I'm talking about a thing called NLP. And he said, NLP. And he started going into this big long rant about how NLP was this and NLP was that, like he hated it. And so I'm just nodding away. And then next thing, the guy next to him starts challenging him and disagreeing with him. Now, this is a guy I've not met. I don't know. He's nothing to do it, but he's defending NLP. Next thing, the girl next to me and the girl next to her, they start defending it. So now there's 3 people defending NLP. He's attacking, and I'm just eating. And finally, he turns to me and goes, "Have you anything to say for yourself?" I said, "Yes, the soup is absolutely delicious." And then he just gets back to arguing. So this lasts for about 45 minutes, and they're like on my side, even though I haven't said one positive thing about NLP the whole time. I'm just like listening, and I'm like, again, digging into the turkey. The next day I go and speak. He comes down he's at the back of the room, and afterwards he comes up and goes, "Oh, Owen, listen, I'm sorry about last night. By God, my view has totally changed after hearing you talk about it." And he goes, "But I was just fascinated with how you didn't try to defend and blah, 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 blah." And I'm like, "Why should I defend it? It's not a thing." And, even if you ask Richard Bandler about it, Richard says, "It's not alive. People talk about NLP as if it's this thing that's alive." And like, for me, that's the problem, is that why do we always have to be on a side? Like, NLP is a great tool. It's a great tool that allows you to do so many amazing things. It's one of a collection of tools I use. It's probably a small percentage of what I use. And I've learned a lot, and I owe a lot. And I certainly owe a massive amount to Dr. Richard Bandler. But at the same time, a lot of the stuff I've learned from Richard is nothing to do with NLP as well. And so I've learned a lot of tools. NLP is a wonderful tool, does amazing things. And again, you can use it in messed up ways, as some people do. But ultimately, it's a tool. Exactly What to Say is an incredible tool. I'm sure people can use that in messed up ways, but it's a wonderful tool. Cognitive behavioral therapy, wonderful tool. Deep canvassing, street epistemology. These are wonderful tools for persuasion or changing beliefs. Motivational interviewing. We can keep going, but all of these are wonderful tools. And for me, I hate it when people just label everything I do NLP. Not that I'm not proud of NLP, but it's just a tool. And when we see it like that, we realize that when let's say, again, coming back to Richard, when Richard speaks, he doesn't spend the whole time trying to prove to you about how amazing NLP is. He just does it. And when he does it, his ability to create change is coming from his life experience. It's not just from the model. So while NLP allows us to get great results, it's not just NLP. It's also the way in which you apply it. And the same is true of Exactly What to Say. People can use your work brilliantly, and they don't have to be you, right? And they don't have to talk to everybody else about how amazing Exactly What to Say is. The work itself speaks for itself, but it's a tool. And that's kind of my approach.
And I think what's interesting is, coming full circle on this whole labeling thing, is if you are in any way unfamiliar with what NLP is, it's an acronym for neuro-linguistic programming. That's what NLP stands for, which is an exceptional label.
Yeah.
Like, what it does is it has people feel like they have got like FBI, MI5, mind-bending, like superpowers to be able to like conjure up something. I mean, I can neuro-linguistically program you?
Yeah.
This feels like it's from a sci-fi movie.
Yeah.
And that label makes it very attractive for somebody to want to be able to invest in, to be able to understand, to have as a certification or some form of accreditation to say that I've got the power to be able to do something. It's also a permission-based label that says, actually, here is a formula. Here are a series of tools that, when combined, mean that what you can do is you can do something to someone. And I think the risk with any of these tools that could help people change their minds is, if you view them as something you're doing to someone, you're going to miss. When you take a viewpoint from a leadership angle and say that these are tools to allow me to lead conversations, lead moments for someone on their behalf, for a greater good, for a greater outcome, for a benefit that has their outcomes ahead of anybody else's, then you can do great things. And just like a knife in a kitchen can be used to make a Michelin star meal, a knife in a kitchen can be used for many other things too. And how would you describe people describe to people that, if they were to look to explore their own journey around persuasion and influence techniques, if they wanted to be able to help change minds of their employees, their customers, others, like, what would you invite them to study? What would you do as, their journey of tools that they need for their toolkit to help them know exactly how to change people's minds more effectively?
I would say you look at all the tools and you figure out, first of all, where do you want to get to? What do you want to achieve? But you don't go into one and just go, okay, this is my team. So for example, with NLP, as you mentioned, the term itself makes it very appealing in one sense, but also makes it very easy for people to dismiss as a cult.
Correct.
And the people that often study NLP and the way in which they talk about it make it very easy for people to go, oh, this is amazing stuff. Look at the power. Like, because if you practice some of the stuff and it transforms your life, you're like, wow.
Yep.
But at the same time, it also makes it very easy for people to go, oh, look at how intense these people are. It sounds like a cult to me.
Right.
So the problem to me is not the tool. The tool is wonderful. It's amazing. So what I would do if I wanted a person from scratch to be able to do it, I'd say study social psychology, study neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, study exactly what to say, study cognitive behavioral therapy, study Robert Cialdini's 7 principles,
Yes.
study sales psychology, study negotiation
Read
psychology.
Chris Voss's work.
Absolutely. Yes. Learn all of these different things. Personally, I'm so interested in it. I've been studying propaganda. I've been studying brainwashing, right? I qualified as a hypnotherapist when I was much younger. So for me, I go deeper than the average person would go because this is what I'm obsessed with. But if you're looking to just get really good in terms of influence, those certain foundations we just discussed, that's the starting point. There's a great book called How Minds Change by Dave McRaney, and he touches on things like an area called street epistemology and deep canvassing, which I mentioned earlier. These are different elements which, once again, allow us to look at how can we start to be better at helping people change minds. And as he puts it, it's not that you change people's minds, it's that you help them to change their own minds. And whereas his look is more, not just towards political, but like about social issues, I've often started off looking at how do we change beliefs that limit us from a therapy point of view, or from now in my role as an executive coach. But you're always looking to take these as tools, and you're never looking to go, oh, I'm this person. So if you want to label yourself, find a label that works for you, that doesn't prevent you from learning and taking from everything else.
Right.
Because to me, the greatest success that we can have comes from us being able to know what, in your words that you've put it before, our North Star is, and then to collect from all of the different areas, what are all the tools that can help us to move forwards towards that particular North Star effectively? And that's kind of where I go.
You just made me realize something. I was running a 20-person immersive 2-day program at our offices in Manhattan around exactly what to say and the methodology that sits around it just a couple of weeks back. And one of the attendees for the room really surprised me because they were somebody I really admired at a higher level. And my belief was semi-echoing in my background, like, why are you here? You don't need this. Like, you're already really, really good at these things. And in our opening session, I was inviting people to explain to us briefly, what their decision-making framework was as to why they chose to invest in themselves at the time of the event. And this one individual simply proclaimed, I love learning. I love learning. I love learning. And that label made it very easy for me to be able to show up fully for that person with no judgment. I didn't feel that I had to be able to say what's better than anybody else's or to have the smartest answer in the room. Is merely to be able to provide information that would allow somebody to learn because they love learning. And the thing about loving learning is that you can learn what you want to do, what you don't want to do. You can learn what is helpful to you and what is unhelpful to you. But the decision to say I'm going to label myself as I love learning is so inclusive and empowering, and reduces the bar for anybody else around you. And it was a real learning moment for me in that environment, how somebody can be both confident and humble at the exact same time.
I think that's a great mindset. And it's also, to me, one of the mindsets or beliefs that I hear that is not quite as helpful or useful is when people, what we call course junkies, they keep going and doing the same thing over and over again. And as they go through it, it's like, I'm not enough until I do this. And to me, that direction, that particular belief means that no matter what they do, they'll never feel enough because they don't have criteria that allows them to be able to feel that way.
Right.
You don't get to a point where you're enlightened and you go, now I'm ready. Like life doesn't work like that. Whereas when someone has the belief, I love learning, that's again, to revert back to the belief growth mindset. It's believing I love being wrong, or I love learning new things, or I love being surprised. The more we can start to carry with us these fundamental beliefs, which allow us to filter the world, the more, to me, that's the game changer, because it means from now on, I'm open to what I'm getting, whether it's attending a course that I'm able to learn from, or it means me transforming my life because I see something in a totally different way than I ever have before. To me, those are the kinds of mindsets we need to bring in more into our life if we are to be more impacted. I mean, we talked about it earlier, but one of the things you mentioned is in order for you to be able to change someone else's mind, you have to be prepared to have your mind changed. That's something, again, Dave McGraney said in his book, and it's something that is critical for us as we start to navigate our way through, the social world we live in, as well as, our own mental health.
Wow. As we start to bring our conversation towards a change and an end and a conclusion, there's likely to be at least one person that is aware of the fact that they have a belief that could benefit from changing. What are the steps? What is the process? How do they go from, I know I need to shift a belief, to that belief is now changed?
There's 6 parts that I believe that we need to look at. There's what I call the scaled framework. And this stands for stories, community, actions, logical belief, emotional belief, and then drive.
Okay.
Right? I start with the story. So whenever we think about a belief, what we have to also realize is a belief is nothing but a story we tell ourselves. It's not just a story we tell ourselves, it's a story we sell ourselves. And the stories that we sell ourselves become the beliefs that we buy into.
Right.
And so once you realize that it's a story, then you can ask yourself the question, so what is the story I'm selling myself? What is it that I'm convincing myself of? Now, that actually presupposes that it is a story. It's not a truth.
Yep.
And the first step towards changing a belief is recognizing that it is a belief.
Correct.
So it's an idea we feel certain about. Now we need to transform that word. That word feel is the most important word of that sentence. So we have to change that word feel. So we start off by recognizing what's the story? What are other stories that might be true here? And you're not saying I'm going to buy into any of these stories, but you're giving yourself alternatives. And the reason you're doing that is because most of the time what we try to do is we try to prove ourselves wrong, logically.
Yeah, and we could displace instead.
Exactly. You're displacing by giving yourself other options. And you're not buying into anyone yet, but you're giving yourself choices.
Okay.
The next one is you look at the community or the culture and you ask yourself, how's this being reinforced for me? So why am I believing this? And sometimes we believe in it because you've experienced it directly, but more often than not, the reason we believe what we believe is because someone told us and we believed them, right? We gave them authority, right? I call it the principle of false authority. Sometimes someone is an expert in one space, they go into another space, they give us advice and we believe them in this. I know a lot of people that are doctors but never got their medical degree because anytime anyone's ever sick, they give their hypotheses. This is what you should do. A lot of fitness coaches out there, this is what you should do. I'm training for the marathon at the moment. You know what, Owen, you need to do? And I'm asking myself, have you ever trained for the marathon? They go, well, no, but this is what you should do. Everyone's an expert. So the community we surround ourselves often is the source. So once again, you do an inventory and you go, where have I heard this belief from? Where's this been reinforced? What social media channels or shows have reinforced this message? Because that then helps you to understand who has said this to you, and it gets you to recognize the authority behind it might not be wrong. So it's almost
like if you were writing a paper, you want to fill it full of good citations that were well researched and had value to them. You're sense checking this as an audit in yourself.
Exactly. And then you realize, well, actually, I've been using this study for ages and actually the study didn't take place. Right. So it's understanding,
You mean like the whole misinterpreted 93% of all communication is nonverbal?
Yeah, exactly. 55% is this, 38% is this and stuff like that, which has been quoted since the 50s. But the point of it is that you look at the community or culture where that's come. The third is the actions. And we started talking about this, the habits and the beliefs, which comes first. Well, then you have to look at what are the beliefs that I'm engaging in that's reinforcing this belief? And what are new behaviors that I could engage in that would reinforce a different belief or a different story? And that's when you start to look at the other stories. What community could you surround yourself with that would help reinforce the new stories? So that SCA, that's all about the stories, the community, and the actions.
Yep.
And then the L, E, and D is really, first of all, logically, that's when you start to challenge. That's when you start to bring out okay, let's say if you did it with exactly what to say you would do. So what makes you think of this? Or, what understanding do you have of how this works? right? And where did you get that perspective from? And that's when you start to analyze the logic. In CBT, it would be challenging the particular distortions inside that. In NLP, it'd be the meta model where you go, how do you know that's true? Where do you get your evidence?
This is you working to break it, basically.
That's exactly.
Yep.
And so that's the other side, again, a Socratic approach, really. Then the emotional side is, what are the feelings that you've created this belief from? In other words, there's a principle in neuroscience called affective reality. And that means that we often don't see reality as it is. We see it as we feel. Wow. So if I'm hangry, it means I'm looking at the world through the lens of being hangry. So I'm distorting the world because I'm hungry. I'm angry at the world. And therefore I'm seeing everything you do pisses me off. Why? Because I'm hungry. Now, I'm not thinking about it as I'm hungry. I'm just seeing you piss me off. But you wouldn't piss me off if I wasn't angry, if I wasn't agitated.
Right.
So we see the world differently depending on how we feel. And so if you think about it, when you formulate that belief, that story you tell yourself, you formulate it when you were feeling a certain way. So you then start to unpack, what is the feeling that drives this belief? And you start to understand that when that happened, when I got that learning, that lesson about life, like I believe that I'll always be alone, right? It was because I was feeling bad because I'd just been dumped. Right. So I felt like I was a piece of crap. I felt that no one would ever love me. And that feeling in turn translated into the belief. And that is one of the things that people miss out on, because so many people stick in just the logic. It's always like, the way I beat you in beliefs is I logically bully you to the point where you go, oh, I was wrong. But knowing that you were wrong is not the same as feeling you were wrong. But when you recognize the feeling is different, that's a big difference.
And that the feeling may be connected to a moment, and that moment is no longer true.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the moment was probably not even true then. It was just the feeling that you had, and the feeling is not a fact. So just because you felt that way doesn't mean that that was true. It's just the way you felt.
Okay.
And disconnecting that. And then the final one, and this is one of the most powerful ones, is that, how does it serve you, right? What do you get out of believing this? If you believe something, you know, they did a fascinating study.
What is the benefit of that belief?
Exactly. They did a fascinating study a few years ago whereby they found that one of the things that was most likely to predict what a person believed is, do they want to believe it? Right? We are more likely to believe what we want to believe than we are to believe something in the space of facts. There's this great case where in 2012, when the world was about to end, there was a cult that says the world is going to end on this day. And then the world didn't end. And instead of turning around going, maybe this is all a lie, once again, cognitive dissonance, identity, all that sort of stuff, they said, well, thank goodness, because we believed and prayed, we saved the world.
Yay!
Exactly.
We did it.
Exactly. So you know, it's win-win. And to me, it just speaks to how important wanting to believe it. So then what I would do is I would go, those other stories that we're putting out there, which of those stories will help you to do better? So if you believe the story that says I'll always be alone.
So this is a circle, right?
Exactly.
And even that feeling piece, you might ask yourself, how would you rather feel? What is the feeling that you are hoping to be able to chase and create movement?
That's it. And also recognize if you were feeling differently, then realize the reality would be different.
So this is firstly to find the story.
Yeah.
Then it's to look at the community, you say?
That's right. The people that are.
All that sits around it. And that's both like the knowledge base of who gave you that belief.
As well as the reinforcement.
The reinforcement of the people that comes around it. It's then that like, is that audit type piece?
The action. Yeah. So the action of the habit that we're engaged in. So what behaviors.
So the audit piece comes into the community. That's where you're checking.
Yes.
Is like, is this actually got as much truth to it, as much credibility as what it could be? But the action is you looking at saying, well, are my steps in line with the outcome that I'm looking for? Am I actually doing the things towards the thing that I say that I want? Or am I, in conflict to that? And then the L?
The L is logic. So that's, again, the typical traditional thing that we, if you're very good at change of beliefs, more often than not, you'll be challenging them. How do you know that's true? What's your evidence? All that sort of stuff. The Socratic approach.
So the ability to either have yourself or have somebody you care about ask you meaningful, structured questions to allow you to be able to break down that belief.
And get you to realize that it's
not as true as you've been telling yourself.
Correct.
Okay. There, what you then look to be able towards is to be able to understand the emotion, and that's both the emotion that could have triggered the belief appearing in the first place, the emotion that could have reinforced that belief, the emotion you were feeling at the period of time, but equally and importantly, the emotion you'd like to be feeling instead of. Because feelings drive actions.
Yeah.
And only then do we look at the D, which is
desire or drive.
Drive or
it's your
desire.
Motivation. I want to believe this.
Like what makes it worth it? And that's you looking again at both sides of the coin, right? Is what is it about this existing belief that's serving me?
Yeah.
And what is it about the new belief that could be serving me? And let's put those side by side, like they're restaurant menu items, and see which one you pick. And then once you've realized the belief that you'd like to pick instead, you go back to the beginning again and say, how do I need to rewrite the story? What is the community I need to surround myself with? What action should I be taking that I'm not taking right now? Then what you look to be able to do is the L again. The L is
logic and evidence.
Logic. It's like, let me just support this with evidence to say, if I do these things, then why will that be better for me? Then you get some confidence that that feeling that you were hoping to achieve is likely to be evidenced by the new logic that exists. And what you then do is you ask yourself a question of why will it be worth it when that change has been created, and then you get busy.
Nailed it. Yeah.
Got it.
Spot on.
So it's that easy.
It's that, look, you make it sound very, very easy, and it is.
And it's that hard though, right? There's so many things that can get you off tracks. The tracks and the path and the steps are solid. And what I love about actually any of the work around this from a psychology, behavior, influence point of view, just about everybody's saying a version of the same thing.
Yeah.
Just like all the greatest songs that we love are about the same things.
Yeah.
And the much of the work about how to live a better life is a version of the same thing. Mm-hmm. And what every great keynote speech is merely a poster of possibility to allow people to see a version of themselves that they're not yet seen, to see if they want to run towards it.
Yeah. And it's pointing, a lot of times influence is less about change and more about sort of making things clear, or helping people see things that they haven't been focusing on.
Clarity and choices.
Clarity and choices. And a big part of helping people to become, again, the hero of their own story, so they're no longer victims or villains, is to empower them with the realization that clarity and choices is the way to go. When you realize that you have control over the way you approach things, the way you think, and fundamentally the beliefs that you have, that changes things. And I think a lot of the self-improvement or psychology area really speaks to ideas, or these are the beliefs you need to have, but not everyone always talks about, well, how do you build them?
Right.
And that's kind of what I'm more interested in, is not just what are the thoughts or what are the beliefs that you need to have, but okay, great. There's lots out there on that, but how do we actually build them in a comprehensive way? And that's why I love the work I do, because this is stuff I'm constantly working on myself all the time.
Oh, and you're amazing. Thank you so much for this conversation, and just a reminder that we get to be able to feel differently if we want to feel differently, and the steps to be able to get there is, if people want to understand more about your work, maybe even they want to follow your amazing podcast show that you've put together, like where do we point people? How do they get to be able to plug into more of your expertise and wisdom? Thanks
so much again, Phil. Real pleasure to talk to you today. For anyone who is interested, at owenfitzpatrick.com. I've also got Change Your Minds podcast, as Phil mentioned, so you can check that out on YouTube. And I also have a newsletter on owenfitzpatrick.com/newsletter called Inner Propaganda, which is the kind of title I give to a lot of the work I do. So a big thank you again, and would love to connect with anyone. I'm also on social media, LinkedIn and stuff.
Thank you, my man.
Thanks, buddy.